Welcome to the Expert Academy and to this course on overcoming imposter syndrome. If you're looking to truly understand what imposter syndrome is and how to deal with it, or how to help others who suffer from it to deal with it, then this is the course for you. Through a series of short video-based lectures, you'll learn what imposter syndrome is, what self-sabotage is, how common this belief system is, that success isn't about luck or chance, the typical thoughts a person with this syndrome has, potential causes or childhood experiences that may have contributed to imposter syndrome, what triggers one's inner critic, how cognitive biases, distortions contribute to imposter syndrome, coping mechanisms to handle imposter syndrome, and strategies to overcome imposter syndrome. The course can benefit anyone who's interested in this topic, especially the following groups: managers and other team members who want to understand how to better work with employees and colleagues who suffer from imposter syndrome, leaders who feel inadequate, persons who believe that they suffer from imposter syndrome and want to manage the symptoms, professionals that want to improve their confidence levels when applying for promotions or to perform better in their current role, anybody else who believes they suffer from imposter syndrome and wants to manage the symptoms, anyone that wants to improve their confidence levels. So, let's get started. Clinical psychologists Pauline R. Clance and Susan A. Ames were the first two people to coin the term imposter syndrome. Their research began as a result of high-ranking women constantly complaining of feeling incompetent in their positions and, as a result, not performing well. These women were always comparing themselves to their male counterparts in that regard. However, later on, it was discovered that the males also experienced such feelings. Clance and Imes introduced the term in an article entitled The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention in 1978. According to the two psychologists, imposter syndrome is an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. Because their initial observations were of women, the research was focused on professional and academic women. Over 100 women took part in the survey. 2/3 of the women surveyed were known to Clance and Imes through their therapy sessions and lectures. The remainder of the participants were already in psychotherapy sessions. All of the women were high achievers in their respective pursuits. Despite having been highly recognized for all their achievements, the women failed to see what others were seeing in them. Many of these women attributed their achievements to luck and chance, while others simply believed that external parties were overestimating their skills. Pauline Clance and Susan Imes attributed imposter syndrome to the following factors: cultural norms, gender stereotypes, attribution style, and familial problems. They also found that because these women were unable to meet their own self-inflicted standards, they were likely to suffer from depression, reduced self-confidence, frustration, and anxiety. The Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale was developed by Pauline Clance in 1985. It was designed to address problems which came up with the Harvey Imposter Phenomenon Scale, which was developed in 1981. The purpose of the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale was to identify how fearful people are, as well as the extent of their fear. The following aspects were measured: a person's self-esteem, fear of evaluation, a person's guidelines for measuring their success, fear of not matching the success of others, fear of not being successful or not continuing to be successful. The Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale used a 5-point scoring system to gauge responses. The responses ranged from strongly agree, which was allocated 5 points, to strongly disagree, which was allocated 1 point. The Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale has been used in research since its inception. Here are some other scales that have been developed to measure imposter syndrome. They are: number 1, the Harvey Imposter Phenomenon Scale, which, as mentioned, was developed by clinical psychologist Joan C. Harvey in 1981. This scale was used on undergraduate and graduate students. This scale used a 7-point scoring system to gauge responses. The responses ranged from not at all true, which was allocated 6 points, to very true, which was allocated 0 points. Some items on the scale were scored in reverse. Number 2, the Perceived Fraudulent Scale, which was developed by psychologists John Kaligin and Robert J. Sternberg in 1991. It is a 51-item scale. Number 3, the Leary Imposter Scale, which was developed by Leary et al. In 2000 and uses a 7-item scale. In 1985, Pauline Clance noted the 6 characteristics that determine if a person experiences imposter syndrome. They are: number 1, the imposter cycle. The cycle starts when a person is assigned a task, following which they either begin to over-prepare to complete the task or they procrastinate. Then there is the mad rush to complete the task. After, this person experiences relief to be done with the task at hand, and finally, this person proceeds to discount any accolades they may receive for finishing the task. The cycle is repeated when another task is assigned. Number 2, the need to be the best all the time. Number 3, displaying the characteristics of a superhero. We'll discuss this a little later in the course. Number 4, fear of failure. Number 5, having no confidence in their abilities and downplaying any praises given to them. And number 6, feeling guilty about any success. Imposter syndrome is also common among minority groups including Asians, Latinos, and African Americans. Additionally, there is high occurrence of imposter syndrome among women, especially first-generation college students. And with that, you've reached the end of our introductory lecture. Please download and complete the Introduction to Overcoming Imposter Syndrome worksheet. Then join us in the second lecture where we'll explore more about how imposter syndrome affects people in the workplace. See you there. Welcome back. Here in Lecture 2, we're going to discuss how imposter syndrome affects people in the workplace. Hopefully, this lecture will give you greater insight into what it's like to have imposter syndrome if you're taking this course in order to help others. So, what exactly is imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome encompasses those feelings of self-doubt that you may have about your accomplishments at work. Imposter syndrome is also called imposter experience, imposter phenomenon, or fraud syndrome. It includes, but is not limited to, having little to no confidence in your abilities at work, being sensitive to any errors you make, always feeling like you will or are failing your colleagues, always feeling burnt out or overworked, feeling like you are misleading your colleagues into believing that you are much better at your job than you actually are, believing that any successes you are able to achieve are due to luck or chance, wanting everything you do to be perfect, and having low self-esteem. If you experience any of the above, you are not alone. Imposter syndrome can be experienced by anyone, but is usually more common in people in upper management positions. Also, note that imposter syndrome is not considered a psychological disorder. However, people with imposter syndrome often suffer from some form of anxiety disorder. There are 5 types of imposter syndrome, which were defined by an expert on the subject, Dr. Valerie Young. The 5 types are: number 1, the natural genius. Number 2, the expert. Number 3, the perfectionist. Number 4, the soloist. And number 5, the superhero. Let's explore more about each type. Number 1, the natural genius. People with the natural genius type of imposter syndrome focus mainly on how quickly and easily they can complete tasks as opposed to the effort that was put into completing them. As the name suggests, they place a lot of emphasis on being natural geniuses. Someone with this type of imposter syndrome will likely feel ashamed if they are unable to master a task quickly and easily. Such persons often set a very high bar for themselves, which is usually almost impossible to achieve. Perfectionists are often accused of having this trait as well. Natural geniuses believe that they must get the task right on the first try, otherwise they have failed. Here are some ways to tell if you are a natural genius. Are you of the view that you can handle everything on your own? Do you always aim to complete tasks on the first try? Are you always being praised for your intelligence? Do you feel shame if you are faced with a setback? Does your confidence wane if you are not sure that you can perform as you think you need to? And do you avoid taking part in anything that you do not believe you are good at? Number 2, the expert. Experts often believe that they are not knowledgeable enough. As such, they tend to be afraid that their ignorance will be exposed. Here are some ways to tell if you are an expert. Are you always trying to expand your knowledge base and skills by constantly pursuing certifications and training? Do you get fearful when someone calls you an expert? Do you feel inadequate in your role even if you have been performing your duties for a long time? And do you avoid applying for a position because you do not meet all of the requirements, particularly the educational ones? Moving on to number 3, the perfectionist. Perfectionists often believe that the only way a task can be done correctly is if it is done themselves. They like to be in control and they experience self-doubt when they cannot meet the goals that they have set for themselves. Here are some ways to tell if you are a perfectionist. Are you terrible at delegating tasks to others? When you delegate, do you feel that the results are subpar? Do you feel that your work must be perfect all of the time? When you complete a task but it was not done to the impossibly high standards that you have set, do you think about it for days on end? Are you a micromanager? Number 4, the soloist. Soloists rely on themselves and find it very difficult to seek assistance. Soloists are also called rugged individualists. Soloists think that accepting help means that they are not good enough to complete a task alone. Here are some ways to tell if you are a soloist. Do you consider the needs of the team or project before your own? Do you strongly believe that you can do everything on your own without any outside assistance? And are you constantly stating that you do not need anyone's help? Number 5, the superhero. Superheroes are always trying to measure up to their colleagues who they believe are better than them. They tend to push themselves further than they can handle in an effort to meet a standard that is unlikely to exist in the first place. The immense workload eventually affects their mental health and even relationships. Here are some ways to tell if you are a superhero. Have you given up your hobbies or relaxing activities in the name of work? Do you stay at the office longer than you need to? Do you find it difficult to relax when you're not working? And do you feel that you need to work harder no matter how many accolades you have achieved? Now let's discuss self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is generally triggered by fear of failure or feeling of inadequacy. Most, if not all of the time, these feelings can prevent you from doing what is necessary to achieve your goals. As this happens, your thought processes drift towards the negative and, as such, greatly affect the judgment calls that you make. In turn, your self-worth and confidence take a major blow, which negatively affects your ability to work towards your goals. If you think about it, self-sabotage is really you being your own worst enemy. It can manifest as self-criticism, procrastination, and even for some individuals, the consumption of drugs and excessive quantities of alcohol. Self-sabotage usually surfaces as a direct result of having imposter syndrome. Many persons who experience self-sabotage know it doesn't even make sense, but find it difficult to shake the feeling. Self-sabotage is a form of self-protection, protection from the fear of failure or disappointment. It provides a crutch that you can lean on to explain why you think you will fail at something before you even start. Self-sabotaging behavior is so ingrained that it happens automatically. When you self-sabotage, you become less motivated and you also have less incentive to actually pursue your goals. Self-sabotage can be characterized by the following. Number 1, always needing to be in control. Number 2, not believing in yourself and your capabilities. Number 3, not having a strong sense of self. And number 4, being afraid of change or of the future. With all that being said, you need to understand that you are capable. It's not luck that got you where you are today. You were not simply in the right place at the right time. It was not the sole responsibility of your connections or anything else you may want to convince yourself of that you are not deserving of your success. You are capable and worthy, and you deserve your wins. Finally, let's look at how common imposter syndrome is. The National Center for Biotechnology Information conducted a review using various screening tools. This review was made up of 62 studies on imposter syndrome, 50% of which took place within the last 6 years. The studies had a total of 14,161 participants. Approximately 40% of the participants were men. Given that over half of the reviewed studies were of students, The weighted mean age of the participants was 20 years. However, not all of the studies reported a mean age. The participants comprised the following academic levels: elementary, high school, undergraduate, and graduate. Based on the studies, the students' fears centered on wanting to seem perfect at all times to their peers. They were also likely to have low self-esteem and pessimistic traits. The difference between the grades of the students with imposter syndrome and those without was minuscule to non-existent. However, students with imposter syndrome are less likely to plagiarize the work of others or cheat on exams. Further review of the studies found that students who belonged to minority groups were more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. They were also likely to be more stressed for the following reasons: being the first in the family to pursue higher education, being subject to racism, having to support themselves financially through school, not having financial aid to help with tuition, and being subject to negative stereotypes. The remainder of the studies assessed included employed people. Their careers ranged from doctors and nurses to teachers and accountants. Employed persons with imposter syndrome are more likely to suffer from decreased job performance, increased stress levels, reduction in job satisfaction over time, low self-esteem, fear of failure, and burnout. Some of the variables considered in the assessment included the following: study methodology, demographics, workplace performance, treatments provided, professional setting, reductions in comorbid conditions, response rates reported, human subjects approval, and diagnostic tools used. The review concluded that some studies that were reviewed showed only a 9% incidence of imposter syndrome, while others showed up to 82% of the participants suffered from imposter syndrome. The huge difference is attributed to the various tools used in the assessments, as well as the symptoms that were considered. However, imposter syndrome was quite common in both men and women and crossed several age groups. And that brings us to the end of Lecture 2. Your task now is to download and complete the Imposter Syndrome in the Workplace worksheet, and then after that, join me in Lecture 3 where we'll help you to understand imposter syndrome more deeply. See you there. Welcome to Lecture 3, where you'll gain a deeper understanding of imposter syndrome. Let's start by discussing a scenario. Sheila has been performing exceptionally well at her job. She's always on time and gets on well with her fellow team members. This did not go unnoticed by upper management, and Sheila was eventually promoted to team leader. This meant that she would have more responsibilities under her belt. When Sheila was promoted, she did not feel like she was good enough to be a team leader. Eventually, as her workload increased, she began to feel even more doubtful that she was good enough for the position. Her anxiety increased, and she started avoiding her responsibilities. Eventually, Sheila began skipping work in favor of heading to a bar close to her apartment. Have you ever felt like Sheila? Sheila didn't feel that she deserved any praise. She also doubted her ability to perform at work, and this led to maladaptive behaviors. For example, if she believed in the value she provided to the company, she may have sought help from her colleagues when the workload increased, or she may have asked for advice from management. Instead, she found herself engaging in behaviors that would sabotage her working life, risking her position by avoiding her responsibilities and potentially robbing herself of the opportunity to develop further in her company. Now, let's further explore some of the ways in which people with imposter syndrome think. Number 1, avoiding responsibilities. Although some people lean towards perfectionism, others, like Sheila, shirk their responsibilities or completely avoid taking on new ones. This response is usually triggered by fear of receiving negative feedback after completing tasks. It is also triggered by the fear that any new tasks will highlight their inabilities. Others may completely avoid situations that challenge them in this way. For example, a person with imposter syndrome may avoid applying for a new job. They may even reject a promotion, pay rise, or new responsibilities because they don't believe they deserve it, or they believe they can't do better. Additionally, such persons fail to see their worth and the value they bring to their role. In fact, in the first study on imposter syndrome, conducted by Pauline Clance and Susan Imes in 1978, one participant thought that they were mistakenly chosen to participate in the study. Such individuals may also find it hard to voice their opinions. This is because they feel their opinions may not be as valid as others and need approval to help their confidence prior to voicing their opinions. Number 2, perfectionism. Perfectionists set very high goals for themselves, and in many cases, those goals are unattainable. They are never satisfied with anything they do. They focus on any mistakes they think they have made and how they could have performed better, as opposed to focusing on what they did well. For example, even with everything she has achieved, former First Lady Michelle Obama suffers from imposter syndrome. During a speech in 2018 that she was giving at the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson School in London, the former First Lady stated that I still have a little bit of imposter syndrome. It never goes away that you're actually listening to me. This was in response to being questioned about how she felt about being a symbol of hope. In 2020, she told Vogue magazine, "Imposter syndrome is so tough. For so long, women and girls have been told we don't belong in the classroom, boardroom, or any room where big decisions are being made. So when we do manage to get into the room, we are still second-guessing ourselves, unsure if we really deserve our seat at the table. We doubt our own judgment, our own abilities, and our own reasons for being where we are. Even when we know better, it can still lead to us playing it small and not standing in our full power." Other high achievers who have experienced imposter syndrome include actress Emma Watson. She told Rookie magazine that it's almost like the better I do, the more the feeling of inadequacy actually increases because I'm just going, any moment, someone is going to find out that I'm a total fraud and that I don't deserve any of what I've achieved. Author Maya Angelou. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. And film director Jodie Foster. When she first attended Yale University, she thought she wasn't smart enough, deep enough, or preppy enough to belong. Number 3, denial of achievements. People with imposter syndrome are prone to downplaying their success. They may attribute their success to the help of others, to luck, or to other outside forces as opposed to the actual effort they put into it. As a result, they also tend to believe that they are unlikely to repeat their achievement. Additionally, even when the outside factors are truly responsible for any failures, a person with imposter syndrome would likely take full accountability. And number 4, fear of being discovered to be a fraud. People with imposter syndrome constantly fear being found out about being inadequate. Because they already believe that they are not good enough, they live in constant fear that others will discover who they really are. Because of this assumption, they tend to push themselves beyond their limit to overcompensate for their perceived flaws. They refuse to believe that anything they do is good. Now let's look at some of the ways in which imposter syndrome can affect different aspects of life. Number 1, relationships. A person with imposter syndrome will feel like they do not deserve their partner's affection. They fear that their partner will find out that they are not a good person or partner. They tend to end their relationships prematurely or otherwise sabotage them. Number 2, home. As a parent, you may feel like you will ruin your child or children's lives because you do not think you are capable of being a good parent. And number 3, education. Students with imposter syndrome may be afraid to speak up in an educational setting or seek clarification from the teacher. They fear being seen as unintelligent. If they repeatedly avoid asking for help or clarification, their performance may suffer in the long run. We've reached the end of the lecture. Your task now is to download and complete the Understanding Imposter Syndrome worksheet to reflect on what you've learned in the session. After that, we will move on to looking at the causes of imposter syndrome. See you there. Welcome to Lecture 4, where we'll discuss the causes of imposter syndrome. Understanding the cause of any thought process or behavior is a helpful step towards overcoming it. So let's begin. There is no single cause of imposter syndrome. However, there are some common factors that contribute. Let's start with number 1, childhood experiences. Sibling rivalry can trigger imposter syndrome. Some children may think that their siblings are better than them, and this can lead them to doubt their own competencies. It may also push them into a position where they are constantly seeking validation and approval from their family members. Number 2, family expectations. Some families place a great deal of pressure on some members to perform and achieve great things from an early age. This pressure is likely to lead to the development of imposter syndrome in children. Another factor is when children are strongly criticized and excessively praised in alternating cycles. This sends mixed signals to the child and they start feeling like imposters. Living in a society where individuals are pressured to achieve more and more can worsen the condition. Number 3, career demands. Imposter syndrome has a high prevalence in academic fields or other highly skilled areas. For example, it's quite common in the medical field. Number 4, personality traits. Imposter syndrome is closely linked to depression, neuroticism, and anxiety. It is also linked to introversion, especially feeling shame, low self-esteem, and seeking validation from others. And number 5, new situations. New situations can trigger self-doubt, especially in situations that the person does not feel ready for. Fear and anxiety usually accompany those feelings. We've now reached the end of Lecture 4. Your task now is to download and complete the Causes of Imposter Syndrome worksheet. Next, we'll explore the connection between cognitive biases and imposter syndrome. See you there. Welcome to Lecture 5, where you'll learn about the connection between cognitive biases and imposter syndrome. Let's begin. In 1972, the term cognitive bias was coined by researchers Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. When we try to process and interpret information, distortions can occur in our thinking, which affects our emotions and how we make decisions. This is called cognitive bias. It's like placing a filter over our perception where we only perceive some information and we don't recognize other essential details. In some cases, cognitive biases are formed when the brain tries to simplify its processes. There are many types of cognitive biases, including the following: attentional bias, actor-observer bias, confirmation bias, the halo effect, false consensus effect, misinformation effect, anchoring bias, self-serving bias, functional fixedness, optimism bias, availability heuristic, and the Dunning-Kruger effect. We all experience cognitive bias at some point, and we may be affected by several biases at once. Even if we think our decisions are logical and objective, we may be affected by various biases and then misjudge situations as a result. Generally, when we experience feelings of not being good enough, it is rooted in the belief that we are not worthy of being loved by others or to be included. The roots go even deeper into how we are taught to value and love ourselves. Based on these feelings, the emotions which trigger those feelings of self-hate are born. This is what sets the tone for our responses, which are usually negative to any given situation. The yardstick by which we measure enough is usually based on our own idea of what perfectionism is, and it is usually a very hard standard to attain. This leads to the unnecessarily hard judgment of ourselves, which highlights and enhances our already negative thoughts. Self-esteem has to do with how you see yourself, whereas self-confidence speaks to what you think you are capable of. Not surprisingly, these two thoughts are comparable. Therefore, when you have negative thoughts about yourself and your capabilities, they morph into negative thoughts about who you are and how impossible it is to change. With that being said, it is easy to see how imposter syndrome is typically linked to low self-esteem and self-confidence. It is those feelings that prevent us from internalizing our achievements no matter how much we have accomplished. Although outsiders see us as experts in our fields or very successful, we feel like frauds who are going to be discovered at any moment. The reality of the situation is that there is a big difference between what actually exists and what we think exists, and it usually leans towards the positive side. For example, we may assume that our coworker is ignoring us because they don't like us, and that this must mean we are a bad person who is unworthy of attention. In reality, there could be a million reasons why they have not responded to us. It's very possible that they did not see the message that was sent or did not hear what we had said. Maybe the co-worker did not even notice us. They may have just been busy at the moment and will respond when they have some free time. But because of the negative conversation we've got going on in our heads, we assume the worst. Low self-confidence and low self-esteem tend to open doors for negative behaviors that create more problems. Examples of such behaviors include not being able to say no, being codependent, or being unable to set healthy boundaries. However, there is good news. We can change how we think and change our self-beliefs to something positive. What we believe about ourselves is not facts, and it is not set in concrete stone. Our negative thoughts about ourselves can be changed. It will take some time, as Rome wasn't built in one day, but it is very possible. This change in our negative thought process can be done through cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps us to see how the way we think can affect our behaviors and emotions. It helps us to reframe our thinking into more positive, rational, and constructive thoughts. As we mentioned before, this is not going to happen overnight. It requires you to make a conscious effort to repurpose your thoughts into something that is more positive. The more you work at it, the better you will get at it. You are not just changing your thought process, but actually you're training your brain to think differently. Now we will look at some basic steps in cognitive behavioral therapy that you can use to challenge your negative behavior. Step 1. Identify the negative things that you say to yourself as they happen. For example, how did I get hired for this job? Then step 2. Try to validate your negative thoughts. What evidence is there to show that you are not worthy of being hired for the job? Step 3. What is the worst consequence of the situation? What is the worst thing that can happen if it's proven that you aren't deserving of the job? And step 4. Is the worst outcome that you have imagined practical? Step 5. What do you have to gain by continuing to have those negative thoughts? Step 6. If you change your negative thoughts to positive ones, what do you think the outcome will be? Step 7. If a close friend came to you with those same thoughts, what would you say to them? And step 8. For each negative thought you have about your worth, counteract it with a positive one. When you first start doing these steps, they may seem silly and forced, but eventually you will see the major yet subtle differences in your thought process. As you replace each negative thought with more positive ones, you'll become more confident and your self-esteem levels will increase. We've now reached the end of Lecture 5. Your task now is to download and complete the Cognitive Biases and Imposter Syndrome worksheet. After that, join us in Lecture 6, where we'll discuss more techniques on how to deal with imposter syndrome. Welcome to Lecture 6, where you'll learn about how to cope with imposter syndrome. Also note that if imposter syndrome is having a substantial effect on your life, it may be worth seeking the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. Now, let's look at a few actions and mindsets you can adopt now to help yourself and your colleagues. If some of those practices seem fluffy or unscientific to you, there is an incredible base of literature and studies, particularly in positive psychology, that illustrates just how powerful these practices can be in helping us build resilience, self-belief, and emotional regulation. All of these are incredibly important for our personal and professional lives. Let's start with mindset number 1. Accept that perfection is not achievable. Accept that no one is perfect. We all make mistakes. After all, we are only human. Learn to embrace your strengths and accept your weaknesses. This doesn't mean you can't develop your weak areas. It's about making peace with where you are and avoiding being harsh on yourself. This attitude will help you to take the pressure off, become more resilient, and give yourself a break. Number 2, discuss your feelings. Share your feelings with someone you trust. It could be a friend, a colleague, a family member. Hearing another perspective may make you feel better about your own capabilities and also remind you that your fears are unfounded. Remember, you are not the only one with these thoughts. Group therapy can help you to find like minded people with whom you can share the journey of overcoming imposter syndrome. A therapist can also help you determine the root cause of your issues. Some companies may employ mindset coaches or provide mindset training for their employees, particularly leaders, to help them overcome feelings of imposter syndrome. Number 3, challenge negativity. Whenever you think of downplaying an achievement, celebrate it instead. Keep your past achievements at the forefront of your mind as opposed to your perceived failures. You can also keep a journal detailing your positive experiences. In addition, you can also save any notes, cards, or even emails that praise you. And when you look at them, remind yourself that yes, you deserved that praise. Number 4, stop comparing yourself to others. Stop measuring your successes against those of the people around you. In many cases, we don't see the full picture of another person's success. Focus on yourself. The more you compare yourself to others, the greater your feelings of insecurity. But when you focus on yourself and your unique gifts and positive qualities, the better you'll feel. Number 5, take small steps. As we mentioned before, achieving perfection is impossible. Instead, focus on doing your job to the best of your ability. It will not always come out exactly as you want, and that's okay. Do you remember the example we gave about being afraid to speak up? If you are one to shy away from group conversation out of fear of being found out, try voicing at least one opinion or suggestion the next time. Number 6, accept your feelings. Every time you experience symptoms of imposter syndrome, don't fight them. Instead, try to accept them, meaning accepting that they are there and making peace with where you're at. When you stop running away from your feelings, you are more likely to work towards overcoming them. By taking this course, you're doing a good job of acknowledging your feelings. So continue to do this. Refuse to let your feelings overwhelm you and prevent you from achieving your goals. Again, when your feelings feel like they're consuming you, focus on what you have achieved and really acknowledge the truth that you really did achieve something great and it was not down to luck or any other factor. And lastly, number 7, positive affirmations. Use positive affirmations to reset your thought processes. In many cases, if you repeat an affirmation often enough, you'll start to believe it. According to positive psychology, one of the key psychological theories behind positive affirmations is self-affirmation theory, Steele, 1988. There are empirical studies based on the idea that we can maintain our sense of self-integrity by telling ourselves or affirming what we believe in positive ways. Very briefly, self-integrity relates to our global self-efficacy, our perceived ability to control moral outcomes and respond flexibly when our self-concept is threatened. Cohen and Sherman, 2014. So we as humans are motivated to protect ourselves from these threats by maintaining our self-integrity. Here are some examples of affirmations that can be used to overcome imposter syndrome. I am worthy. I am capable. I deserve this. I bring something unique to the table. I am intelligent. Focus on the feeling generated within you as you say these statements. This will really help you to reset. If it helps, you can look into a mirror as you repeat them. It is important that for affirmations to have a positive effect in the long term, that you repeat this practice regularly. This is because the neural pathways for these thoughts need repetition to strengthen them. According to a study by Cascio et al. In 2016, there is MRI evidence that suggests these neural pathways are continually strengthened when we practice self-affirmation tasks. And with that, we've come to the end of Lecture 6. Your task is to download and complete the How to Silence Your Inner Critic worksheet. After that, join me in Lecture 7 where we'll explore more steps to help you overcome imposter syndrome. See you there. Welcome to our final lecture. Here we'll explore some additional methods that you can use to prevent the symptoms of imposter syndrome from taking over your life. An important step in not letting imposter syndrome take over your life is reframing your thought processes. This will make a marked difference in how you approach situations. People who do not have imposter syndrome are not better than you. It's important that you understand this. One of the best ways to increase your awareness and control over your thoughts is mindfulness meditation. It will help strengthen your awareness of your feelings and impressions. Acknowledgement is always the first step. When leaning into mindfulness around imposter syndrome, you may come across the following realizations. Self-doubt. Reassure yourself that self-doubt is normal. Everyone has experienced it. You are normal. Be kind to yourself when you are under pressure and feeling stressed. It can be easy to beat yourself up and doubt your abilities. Taking a step back and exercising compassion towards yourself can really help. Guilt or fear of not achieving or working. It is also important to remember that you do not need to be accomplishing something to feel fulfilled. Audrey Irvin, PhD, a clinical psychologist, says it's about learning to recognize those feelings of fear and learning to truly be okay as you are without your accomplishments. Isolation. Trust others with how you feel. By speaking to people and cultivating a safe environment where you can rely on and trust in the affirming feedback you get, you can challenge the thoughts you have about yourself. You may even discover that there are other people around you that are feeling the same way. Kevin Coakley, PhD and Professor of Educational Psychology, reports there's a lot of solace in knowing there are others out there experiencing what you are. You can share your insecurities and in turn gain new ways to cope. Inadequacy. To counteract this, celebrate your successes. No matter how big or small the achievement, make sure you take the time to recognize the things you accomplish. Being more mindful will help you internalize your achievements, and in turn, you will feel more self-assured in your own ability. In the same respect, don't brush off any praise you receive. Save the emails from others that illustrate how your talents are recognized. Take some time to reflect on praise you've received from others, and also take time to praise yourself and acknowledge your own successes. Reminding yourself of your competency and boosting your confidence without the need for external validation can be extremely powerful and helps you maintain your locus of control. Disillusionment and fear of failure. When operating with imposter syndrome, we can often feel like the goals we've set for the future are unattainable. Visualize how your success will look once you complete your assigned task. Imagine how happy you will be once you overcome any obstacles that you have faced. Remember how that success looks as you move towards your goals. Stay determined, yet calm. Even if you don't complete the task as you would like, use that perceived failure to become better and correct the mistakes you think you made. Congratulations on reaching the end of Lecture 7 and the end of the course. Join us in the concluding lecture where we'll have a brief recap of everything we've covered. Once again, congratulations on completing the course on overcoming imposter syndrome. By now, you should have a much clearer understanding of what it's like for people who live with imposter syndrome and how they can work to overcome it. Let's go over some key takeaways. We started by exploring the history of imposter syndrome and the various scales used to measure or diagnose the syndrome. These scales are the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale, the Harvey Imposter Phenomenon Scale, the Perceived Fraudulence Scale, and the Leary Imposter Scale. We also went on to define imposter syndrome and outline the 5 types of imposter syndrome, which are the natural genius, the expert, the perfectionist, the soloist, and the superhero. We further explored self-sabotage and its characteristics. We also briefly discussed the prevalence of imposter syndrome. Next, we reviewed how people with imposter syndrome think and how it affects various parts of their life. We then explored the many causes of imposter syndrome, which ranged from childhood experiences to personality traits. After that, we focused on cognitive biases and how they are linked to imposter syndrome. We also discussed how cognitive behavioral therapy can be used to fight imposter syndrome. Finally, we reviewed how to overcome and cope with imposter syndrome. As you reflect on your experience with imposter syndrome, please remember you are not an imposter. You are real and you are capable. We have a whole catalogue of courses available, so be sure to check out the categories and topics relevant to you and your organisation. Best wishes from the Expert Academy, and good luck.